Hello, folks. Welcome to Podsongs, interview, inspiration, songs. Today, we're talking about meditation and the mechanism behind meditation, why it works. We've got a best-selling author of the book Genie in Your Genes and the new one, Bliss Brain. He researches and teaches advanced healing methods through his EFT universe.com platform. Let me please introduce you to the exuberant researcher, Dawson Church.
I love getting the word out about all these new techniques we have. Like centuries ago, we didn't have modern medicine centuries ago, but we also didn't have all of these wonderful techniques for releasing anxiety, depression. And so we're at this new threshold in mental health where we were with physical health a century ago. And I just love talking about all this stuff. So let's go for it.
Oh, well, the first thing I want to ask is about this tapping, because you promote tapping and meditation. I've obviously made everyone knows about meditation, but I've never heard of tapping before. And I count myself as a pretty educated fella, especially in the world of alternative medicine, but I've never heard of tapping. So fill me in.
Well, it's been around for thousands of years. In my book, The Genie in Your Genes, it's all about the science of epigenetics, how various things affect gene expression and either silence genes or promote the expression of genes. So genes are turned on and off by various kinds of effects, including the effects of our own consciousness. And so one of the earliest ways of healing that comes from the historical record is acupuncture. And acupuncture, of course, uses needles. They go into any one of 365 acupuncture points on the body. And it's really interesting that you can actually measure these points with modern sophisticated technology like a galvanometer to actually measure the surface of the skin and find those acupuncture points. And they were used in China as far back as 2,000 years ago. We know actually now that they were used in Europe as far back as 5,000 years ago. And on the border between Austria and Italy, there was a mummy that was discovered when one of the glaciers melted during a warm spring in 1992 called Otzi. And on Otzi's body, there are 59 tattoos, and those tattoos are on the acupuncture points for the diseases from which he suffered. And that Otzi body is 5,400 years old. So we know that people knew about these acupuncture points over 5,000 years ago in Europe and probably many other places as well. And tapping simply, rather than acupuncture, uses acupressure. And rather than putting a needle in a point, you find the points in your body and you just tap on them with your fingertips. And usually this produces a really quick change. And we can measure it with an EEG, with an MRI, rapid changes in the whole way the brain processes information. And we can also measure its effects on gene expression and things like stress hormones, cortisol, DHEA, adrenaline, and so on. So it's having all these internal epigenetic effects on our bodies when we tap on those millennia-old acupuncture points.
Oh, so we can just do it ourselves. It's like a practice.
Do it yourself. It takes usually, like for example, when we treat veterans, we've treated over 20,000 veterans with PTSD, and they had terrible flashbacks, nightmares. They may remember times in combat. They may go back to childhood memories. And so usually if they have severe PTSD, we recommend working with a practitioner. But for simple stuff, like I just had a difficult meeting right before the podcast. I just did a little bit of tapping afterwards, and in 2 minutes I felt way better. So it works really quickly, and you can use it for traumatic events. But for those, we recommend you work with a practitioner. You don't want to be flooded by horrible emotional memories you can't really hold back. So there are easy things to do it on. The meeting today, or this problem I have in my life right now. If you're going back to childhood, especially trauma, we recommend you work with a practitioner.
And I've seen on your website, you can, on EFTuniverse.com, you have practitioners live standing by at all times.
We do. We developed this app. It was a funny thing. Many years ago, I was thinking it would be wonderful if there was therapy available to anyone who needed therapy, when they're in crisis. Because like I did courses of psychotherapy over the years as a client, and it's like I'd be feeling terrible on Tuesday, so I'd email or phone my psychotherapist and say, well, I have an opening next month on the 3rd Wednesday. It's like, Well, I feel shitty right now. I don't need a. Then's no good. Then because you pay $100 or $200, you arrive at the psychotherapist's office, and you've totally forgotten what it was you were so pissed off about the previous time.
Maybe that's the lesson. Maybe.
So we developed this thing called the tapping place, and on tapping place, it's so cool. We have practitioners who are there. You go in there, you get a free 10-minute session to start with, and then we have just very brief sessions, often 10 minutes or 20 minutes long, because EFT works so fast. Like the average drop there are about 20 studies of EFT for pain, physical pain, and they show that in an EFT session of like 20 minutes or less, pain drops an average of 2/3, like 66% drop in just one EFT tapping session. So you go on tapping place, tap with somebody for 20 minutes or so, and research shows your pain will largely go away.
So what's the best? Is in Genie in Your Genes? Do you give an instruction? Where's the best place to learn it?
Yeah, we actually do classes, and because of the pandemic and economic crash, we haven't been able to do live classes. So for many, many years, we've been doing live classes, but now we're developing virtual classes. And our only challenge here, Jack, is that our classes are accredited for medical education by the American Medical Association, for psychologists by the American Psychological Association. So we can't just go to a virtual training. We've had to put in place a whole bunch of standards that will be acceptable to those big organizations. And so, so now you can do a virtual training as well. So simple stuff, do yourself. More complex stuff, use a practitioner. By all means, go learn it. There's tons of free material on EFTuniverse.com. There are over 5,000 case histories, over 100 clinical trials, and you can go there and you can get a lot of stuff just going there for free.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I love the work you do with the veterans. You have other people you're helping, other groups that you're using in a humanitarian work.
Yeah, I'll tell you, some of those really touch my heart. Like we did one research study that was done with women in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and these women who'd been abused, usually raped by passing gangs of soldiers, and had been terribly abused over the years. I'm getting goosebumps just talking about this. And we gave them just a few sessions of EFT because they were having flashbacks, nightmares, all the symptoms of full-blown PTSD, and their symptoms dropped an average of 2/3. Again, massive drop in all of those symptoms. We did a project in Rwanda, and in Rwanda, we were working with children whose parents had been killed in the genocide. And again, I mean, they're in their 20s now, 25 years later, and they're still having, they're bedwetting, screaming nightmares in the middle of the night. Such severe PTSD. And when you see people like that tapping, and then suddenly all the emotional impact of those memories go away, it's powerful. Now, the memories themselves don't go away. You still remember the brutalization, you still remember whatever it was that traumatized you, except that what's interesting is when we do studies of people's brains, if you remember a traumatic event without treatment, without EFT, without another effective treatment, then all the same areas of your brain light up as if you were actually having the traumatic event. And this is a phenomenon called retraumatization. People literally re-traumatize themselves by thinking about the bad events. So we see that brain pattern. We see parts of the brain like the occipital cortex that handles vision light up. We see parts like Broca's area, which handles language, shut down. So these people, they're having full-blown flashbacks and visions of all the bad stuff, and they can't talk to you about it because Broca's area that handles language is just offline. And so we watch these brain patterns in people's MRIs, then we tap with them. And now they're still remembering the soldiers rushing into their village and murdering and raping and looting. And now all of those areas are no longer active. They're no longer having those flashbacks, those nightmares. They still remember the bad stuff. It just no longer has all that tagging in the brain.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Because I love your work, what you do with, like in this book, Mind to Matter. You take all you prove it. You take things that are not commonly accepted and use the science, the related science, to connect the dots. No?
Oh, that book was outrageous. I began the book actually as a series of radio programs, and I was something of a skeptic. And I'd heard all this new age mumbo jumbo about your thoughts create your reality. And I was like, well, I mean, obviously your thoughts do create your reality, because in some ways, like if you think a negative thought, you then raise your cortisol level. And so by the thought, you're producing the molecular structure of cortisol, and you're triggering the genes that code for cortisol to make high cortisol. So clearly mind is becoming matter in those ways. But when I began to look into the hard science behind things like the observer effect in physics and the way people affect the world around them, like electromagnetism, it's just amazing what happens. Like in one study, the Earth's magnetic field is like a fixed thing. I mean, we measure it. We use big, actually, they're smaller ones now, but they're huge magnetrons that measure the Earth's magnetic field, and they just measure this thing. It's pretty much something we're able to measure and quantify, and it should not be affected by human thought. But in one experiment, the researchers were sending remote healing energy to cages of mice who had cancer. And in this particular randomized controlled trial, there were cages of mice in one building at this university painted red. And in the red room, the healers were sending from a distance of about 5 miles. They were sending healing intentions to this cage of mice that had cancer. And there was a magnetometer right below the cage measuring the Earth's magnetic field. Now, again, that should be totally the same wherever you are. In a second room, different building on campus, a green room, another cage of mice, also with cancer, and also a magnetometer right below it. And so at random intervals, this healer got a message just randomly on his cell phone: send healing intentions to the mice right now. So he didn't know when these random intervals were going to be hitting. He just did it whenever he got the beep on his cell phone, and he sent healing intention only to the mice in the red room. And during those times, the magnetometer that was present in the red room fluctuated from the norm by about 20%, while the magnetometer in the green room with a cage of mice who weren't being healed stayed the same. I mean, that's crazy. How on earth can our intentions, our healing intentions for a cage of mice with cancer affect the Earth's magnetic field remotely in one area and highly locally to that one area? I mean, science has, we know these things now happen, and Mind Matter has hundreds of studies like this.
Did the mice get better?
The mice healed. The mice yeah.
Gosh, so that's because I'm quite new to healing myself. I've been, I've heard of Reiki before, but I've never really heard of spiritual healing. But I joined the Aetherius Society, which is an organization, American, in London, and they send spiritual energy through the palm of the hands and through the heart, and amazing results. So, but now you're saying there's all this evidence for it. So,
there's huge amounts of evidence for physical healing and non-local healing, distant healing. And one of my friends named Beth Meisner has just published a book about her work using consciousness to heal her body. She was diagnosed in March of 2017 with severe metastasized breast cancer, and the tumor they found in her right breast was 5 centimeters across. This is a huge tumor, and it had begun to seed other tumors in her body. So all of her lymph nodes under her right armpit were all swollen and red and inflamed. They found 3 spots of inflammation on her right lung. It looked as though the tumors were now metastasizing to different parts of her body. And she got this diagnosis in March of 2017. And it was like the oncologist said, we want you to start chemotherapy and radiation today. I mean, this is so serious. We want you to start. And Beth said, I need time to think. I need time to reflect on what's best for me. And she said, I'm going to focus on how I can change my world, my consciousness, my energy. So she began to focus on energy as a cure. And she began to do intensive Qigong. My wife and I did some EFT with her. She went to a clinic in Mexico, did a lateral treatment, went and did hyperbaric oxygen treatments, had energy healers work on her. And
not everything.
She did everything, but she changed her consciousness. She got rid of all negative people out of her life, quit negative jobs she was doing, got rid of negative music, negative media, and filled her life with positivity. And she began to feel immensely better, went back to the clinic in May of 2017. Now, I want to just emphasize the time frame here. March, she gets a diagnosis of metastasized breast cancer, a huge tumor. May, 8 weeks later, she goes back to the clinic. The tumor has shrunk from 5 centimeters to 1.4 centimeters, and all of the lymph nodes under her right armpit are completely free of cancer. They just look normal. Later on, she got what's called a blood biopsy, and it showed there was not a trace of cancer in Beth's body. And I talked to Beth, a month ago. And I mean, she isn't just in good health. She's in vibrant good health.
God,
that's the power of energy to heal.
That's so impressive. Gosh. I also read one technique. You measure the white light coming in through the top of the head. Did you do some research into that?
Yeah, I looked at various things that trigger. Epigenetics is so fabulous because if you measure gene expression, you can then tell if something's going on. And so, if gene expression shifts, then you know something's happening. If EEGs and MRI shift, you know something's happening. And so that imagination, that imaginal exercise of imagining light and space filling your head actually produces an increase in alpha waves. And alpha brain waves are right at the middle of the brainwave spectrum. And they're neurons firing in our brains at a speed of 8 to 13 cycles per second. So like 8 to 13 times a second, those neurons are firing. And alpha wave is a wave of relaxation, of creativity, of happy people tend to have lots and lots of alpha going on. People who are stressed have lots and lots of high brain waves, beta, which goes up to about 25 times per second. So above the alpha band, you have beta. And meditators typically will shift down from beta into alpha. And that exercise of imagining that light coming in through the universe, from the universe coming into your head, filling your internal space with the volume of that light, that produces a powerful and, rapid, like 3, 4, 5 seconds, and you're in enhanced alpha. So in Mind to Matter, I list 30 practices that science shows shift you in that way. And EFT, meditation, Reiki, grounding, time in nature. There are many of these practices, and you just need to find the ones that work best for your lifestyle.
When I imagine the white light coming down into my head when I'm doing a prayer practice, I imagine it coming down, and then I can feel both my nostrils open at the same time. There's you also talk about imagining a space between your eyes and then your feet. What does this do, imagining this space?
That was developed by a scientist called Les Fahmy, who worked at Princeton University, and he was doing really early EEG feedback experiments in the 1960s. And so the EEG was developed by a German scientist called Hans Berger in the 1920s. And actually, now we think of these things like SPECT scans and MRIs and CAT scans as normal. But science, it's really interesting how science often has a very hard time accepting new technologies. And many other neuroscientists and people in medicine just dumped on this poor German guy, Hans Berger, when he developed the EEG. They said it's nonsense. There's no way you can read meaningful information from the surface of the scalp. Most of these technologies faced a really long and difficult path to adoption. But it's really interesting when you hook people up to an EEG and you can tell what's happening. And so what Berger, of course, was looking for medical applications for the EEG. But then these researchers into consciousness in the 1960s said, this is a time of free love and Woodstock and all these social movements in the 1960s. And so these scientists said, well, let's go hook up a Swami.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go to the Franciscan nunnery and hook up the Franciscan nuns as they're praying ecstatically to the Virgin Mary. And let's go hook up these Native American shamans. Let's hook up these Qigong masters in China.
That sounds like a fun job when they're applying for their grant. This is what we want to do. Just sign here.
Yeah, and go hook with these people. And what they found was really interesting. And they found that the brainwaves of these people were all over the place. They had no commonality whatsoever in their ordinary daily lives. But the moment they entered the healing space, their brainwaves all took on a simple, single, uniform, characteristic shape. And in my book, Mind to Matter, I call it the awakened mind. So they then took this technology of the EEG. They hooked up all of these adepts, all of these yogis, all of these faith healers, all of these energy consciousness people, and they found they all, in the healing state, entered the awakened mind. So then my focus in research and training for the last 10, 20 years has been, if we know what that pattern looks like, we've mapped this now with tens of thousands of EEG scans, can we train the average Joe or Josephine to get into the awakened mind themselves? And the answer is we can. We can have them do certain things like the big empty space behind your eyes, like the 6-second breathing I have in the book, like other practices. And it's amazing. People are, within about 4 minutes, they're in that same state that yogi who spent 10,000 hours of meditation learning is in.
Oh. Yeah, when I have a heart rate monitor and I put that on, and when I do the HRV, I've got this screen with this Sweetbeat app, and you can see when I do the or in and out for 5 or 6 seconds, then it goes, it gets this lovely curve,
Yes.
So, yeah.
That's all it takes. 6-second in breath, 6-second out breath, you're automatically and you're in heart coherence. And I talk about that a lot as a measurement tool in Mind to Matter. So you then know you're having that state because your heart rate variability graph shows you you're there.
And do you believe in these? For a lot of people are selling these straps that go around your head and measure your brain waves directly. Do you recommend those?
Yeah, that's the Muse headband, and there are others as well. The Muse is the biggest selling one. I've used the Muse myself. I like the Muse. The trouble with the Muse, though, is it only measures stuff on the prefrontal cortex. It has 4 electrodes. What you really want, for research purposes, is you want a full 19 electrode array. So you can't measure things like gamma. Gamma is the most, it's the wave of integration. Really happy, creative people have a lot of gamma, and the Muse isn't much good at measuring that. What it is good at measuring, though, is the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is really worth measuring because that's essentially the part of the brain that makes us smart, that makes us us, and that makes us suffer. And it's unfortunate those things all go together, but the prefrontal has the seed of
so my girlfriend.
Yeah, it's really just an unfortunate design feature of our brains. But what's called the mid prefrontal cortex, and it's really concerned with self. It's concerned with I, me, mine. I call it the me show. In my forthcoming book, Bliss Brain, I talk about the me show and about how the prefrontal cortex literally is constructing our sense of self every moment. And it's what researchers find is when that part of the brain is lit up, people who are self-focused or self-referential in neuroscience terms, self-referential people who are thinking about I, me, mine are not happy people. People who are these Tibetan monks with 10,000 hours of meditation, they're not thinking I, me, mine. They're thinking about compassion, about extending compassion to the world. That's why in my meditations, I always have people extend compassion from their hearts to other people. And getting out of your head, getting out of self-referencing is what we find correlates with happiness. So you want to start to shift your brain away from the mid-prefrontal cortex and toward those happier areas of the brain.
So you send out beam from your heart energy to a point of. So what is your morning routine? What do you? Because you mentioned that they wake up in the morning with these good brain waves, these happy brain waves, and then so we go and ruin it by checking our phone within the first 5 minutes.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
It really was more guaranteed to ruin your day than checking the news or Facebook first thing in the morning. So what you want to do is, my morning routine is important to me because I was a failed meditator for many years. I tried to meditate, joined a spiritual community when I was 15 years old. I was so unhappy. I was just miserable. I was depressed. I was anxious.
Even without a smartphone.
Even without a smartphone, I had my own selfing going on, my own me show running in my mid-prefrontal cortex, driving me crazy and make me unhappy. So I joined the spiritual community, learned to meditate, didn't do it very well because the trouble is, for most of us, you close your eyes, your mid-prefrontal cortex lights up. You start thinking about the problems of yesterday, the problems of tomorrow. You aren't in the present moment, and you feel wretched. So most people don't keep on going with meditation as a result. So I was that person. But then when I was 45 years old, it's like 20 years ago, I said, I'm going to make a commitment to daily meditation. I did. And my whole life within a few months had turned around. It was just amazing the effect it had on me. And it was difficult for me at first. I just stuck with it. So what I've now discovered, though, is if you use certain scientific kinds of meditation, and I want to add that the most of what people do in meditation is not scientific. You have to read the science and do what's proven. They're proven things that will generate those big alpha waves, generate gamma, suppress beta. You need to do proven techniques, and so that's what I have in my books, is I say, do these things. And the interesting thing is, I get up in the morning, I meditate, because you feel so good, and that good feeling is literally biochemical. You're making neurotransmitters like anandamide, which is called the bliss molecule, and serotonin and dopamine, the motivation molecule. You're making all of these, you're making beta endorphins in your brain. You're making oxytocin, the bonding hormone. You're making DHEA, you're making prolactin. You're making all of these chemicals. And so cravings, cocaine, heroin, nicotine, all of these things trigger the dopamine circuit in the brain. But now you're triggering that craving circuit, that reward circuit in the brain, not with cocaine and heroin. You're triggering the synthesis of a large amounts of dopamine in your brain by scientific meditation. And you're triggering serotonin. And serotonin looks the same. The serotonin molecule has the same molecular shape as psilocybin, magic mushrooms. So you're having this magic mushroom, psilocybin, you're taking, that's docking to the same receptor sites in your synapses as serotonin does. So you feel good if you have magic mushrooms, but you feel great if you spike your own levels of serotonin. So I figured out how to do this. I now work on a new course that will actually spike the 7 most pleasurable neurochemicals in the brain. And in Bliss Brain, I call these the bliss molecules. There's 7 of these molecules, and you're going to have a huge amount of these molecules in the brain, and you'll literally become addicted to meditation. You'll become so addicted, feeling good. You'll wake up in the morning, you can't think of anything else. I want my meditation as badly.
This is a big
as badly as the heroin addict in the gutter is fumbling for his needle and his spoon. I want that fix of serotonin and dopamine and anandamide and all these other things. So I meditate in the morning, and it's just addictive when you get the feel of it. That's my morning routine. Tap, just to release any kind of lingering stuff from dreams or whatever, worries about the day, and meditate. And you start the day feeling great. Like today, I wrote this down after meditation, just a bunch of notes on a piece of paper for a meeting I'm having tomorrow, just outpouring of creativity, because research I have in my books, in Mind to Matter, my book Mind to Matter, I cover research showing that people who meditate like this, research shows they are 5 times as productive as non-meditators. So it affects your whole day.
Gosh, so just to go over it one more time, so 6 in, 6 out breaths, equalize the breaths, imagining a space behind your eyes, a white light coming into your head, going out through the heart chakra.
Relax your tongue on the floor of your mouth.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you feel yourself in your heart. These are the 7 steps of eco meditation. They're all free. They're all on the web. You feel yourself in your heart. You then extend a beam of connection and compassion to one person, which you then generalize out to the whole universe, then back to one person, but you feel it in your heart. Because that puts you, the 6 breaths puts you in heart coherence, 6-second breaths, but feeling in your heart puts you into deep heart coherence. And then when you feel compassion, that is again, experimentally, in research, it shows that that type of meditation generates neural plasticity. You spark the growth of new neurons faster than any other kind of meditation. So you want to feel like compassion in your heart. And those are the 7 steps.
So they do it in the Buddhist meditation, do the metta after the meditation. But
Yeah.
that's beautiful, because a lot of the time meditation is quite, even if you're great afterwards, it's kind of selfish. You're experiencing this bliss yourself, but you really could be helping the world in a materialistic way. But when you're sending out spiritual energy as well, you're killing two birds with one stone there, no?
You are. And I asked the question in my new book, Bliss Brain. I said, what generates neural plasticity the fastest? And I tell the story of this man called Phillips, who practiced that meditation. He was practicing loving kindness and compassion. And so Phillips is a television journalist in Australia. And he went into this university and he got tested before beginning to learn meditation. And he got an extensive battery of tests, a full-scale, high-resolution MRI. They measured each little part of his brain and how big it was, the volume of his brain. And he then began to do meditation, practiced every day regularly for 8 weeks, went back into the university, got another high-resolution MRI, and they found that parts of his brain had grown by 3 or 4% in only 8 weeks. And the part of his brain that governs the coordination of emotional regulation throughout the brain. So this is the part of the brain, it's deep inside the brain, it's a tiny C-shaped sliver of neurons. And what they do is they help you not be pissed off. They help you regulate emotions. When you're stuck in traffic, when you're in a long line, when you have to wait for people, when someone's not wearing their mask, whatever it might be. Whatever irritates you, if your dentate gyrus is what this piece of tissue is called, if it's active and if it's big, you have much better ability to suppress negative emotions and generate positive emotions. And so Phillips went back into Monash University after only 8 weeks, and that part of his brain in only 2 months grew by 22.8%. Wow. That's how quickly our minds, our consciousness, our meditative practices are triggering neural plasticity and the growth of new brain tissue. 22.8% increase in the volume of tissue that governs the suppression of negative emotion and the development of positive emotions. 22.8% growth in that neural tissue in only 8 weeks.
Oh, so your new book, Bliss Brain, is focusing on the neuroscience of remodeling your brain for resilience, creativity, and joy. So what is in this that you haven't already included in one of your 100 other books?
Well, I've written kind of a series of 4 books. Soul Medicine was in 2004.
Oh, it's part of a series.
That's all about energy medicine. Then the newest edition of Genie in Your Genes is all about epigenetics, energy psychology, that came out in 2013. And that's all about practices, 12 things we can do that literally turn genes on or off. In one study of EFT tapping, the researcher found that after a 1-hour EFT therapy session, 72 genes were dialed up. I mean, that's a huge change in gene expression in an hour of EFT therapy. So that's Genie in Your Genes. Then Mind to Matter was all about this question of manifestation. How do things go from our brain to the outside world? And it turns out your brain is literally creating the world around you. You may think that it's an objective world out there. It isn't. You are creating hormones and enzymes and all kinds of things inside your body. You're also creating extensively outside your body, like that healer who changed the magnetic field under that cage of mice. So you're changing electromagnetism, you're changing gravity, you're changing the strong and weak nuclear force. Those are the other 4 fundamental forces of physics. There's research showing that people are literally changing the 4 forces of physics using their consciousness. One simple example, in a study of optimists, people who have the conscious approach to the world of seeing the glass half full, not half empty. In this massive 30-year study, people with that consciousness, this is changing, this is a characteristic of consciousness, changing matter. In this 30-year study, thousands of people looking at their optimism or pessimism, optimists live on average 10 years longer than pessimists. So they're changing their brains, they're being more positive, and they're having 10 years longer to enjoy it all. I mean,
and a lot better than before.
Yeah, a lot nice, much better, higher quality of life along the way. So another study just published about 6 weeks ago looked at the correlation between negative thinking and the growth of beta amyloid plaques in the brain. And I talk about these a lot in Mind to Matter. Beta amyloid plaques are the signature of Alzheimer's disease. And they found that the more negative thinking people did, the more beta amyloid plaques there were in their brains. Direct correlation between negative thinking and Alzheimer's plaques. So you really want to use tapping, want to use meditation, use all of these techniques like Beth Meisner did to address whether it's your money, whether it's your fear, whether it's your health. You want to use these techniques because they can make a radical change in your life. And then finally, Bliss Brain. So that was Mind to Matter. In Bliss Brain, I really dug into what's effective meditation, because there are hundreds of meditation schools. They're all claiming to have results, but what does science show really, really, really works? So it turns out to be simple. A lot of it's just window dressing. A lot of what people are doing in meditation is not what's called in medicine the active ingredient. It's just the inert filler. And they may think it's the saffron robes. They may think it's the 108 prayer beads, 109, I forget. It's not. There are certain things. It's compassion that makes a difference. It's meditating in certain ways that makes the difference. It's certain breathing that makes the difference. And there are a million pieces of information you'll get about meditation that really, if you want to do them, by all means go wear the saffron robe. They may put you in the mood, but you want to know what's really scientific. And Bliss Brain is, how do I get from A to serious happiness? How do I get from misery, from limitation? And there's one long-term study of people who've done Bliss Brain. And what they say is most people have no idea of how good their lives can get. Most of us are living lives that are really cramped and limited. And then people who go through the Bliss Brain, you have no idea how happy you are. Like that gamma happiness wave. In one study in Bliss Brain, researchers found that experienced monks meditating in this effective way have 25 times the happiness Bliss Brain signature gamma wave level of ordinary people. 25 times as happy. I mean, most people can't even imagine being twice as happy. We're talking about being 25 times as happy. It's absolutely possible. It's easily trainable. And that's why I want to get a million people meditating through Bliss Brain, through this book.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you've sold me. So I think by the time this podcast comes out, the book will be out. So definitely go to Kindle. And I just wanted to ask, because I've had, you were talking about materialism there, and I've had quite a few, my podcast guests have had these, also talked about it. Where do you stand on because you've said that the brain can create the outside world, but on your philosophical standing, is the brain a reflection of, is the mind makes the brain is like a radio that is formed by or you are the midbrain is to you as a material thing, and we are.
And I think that question and the materialist view is that the brain, as it became more complex over the course of evolution, gradually, in that more and more complex brain, this phenomenon called consciousness arose. That's the materialist view: is that consciousness is housed in and created by the brain, and there is not a shred of evidence in science for that point of view, other than the fact we tend to think of things in materialistic terms in our culture. But the brain actually functions more like a transceiver of a reality field. And these reality fields are non-local. They're not localized in my body or in my brain. They're picking up thoughts from the outside world. Like these studies showing, for example, that you have premonition. I mean, people have premonitions. A lot of the research into premonitions and precognition, that people in some sense know the future, is really interesting. In one study, the researchers hooked up people to an EKG to measure their heart, an EEG measuring brain function, and they then flashed a bunch of randomized 40 pictures on a computer screen. And some of these were really pleasing images, like a baby and a mother, beautiful sunset. Others were emotionally triggering pictures like a car crash. So sometimes there was a Sometimes there was an emotionally soothing image. Sometimes there was an emotionally upsetting image. And they wanted to see what happened with the person, with the heart and the brain of people watching these images. And they assumed that what would happen is that people would see the images on the screen, that information would travel to the brain would respond by realizing this is an upsetting image, and then trigger the heart, which would race faster if it was an upsetting image. So they thought they would see, they thought the sequence would be image, brain, heart. And it's an amazing study. They found that actually the heart fired a nanosecond before the brain. So the heart was responding to that image before the brain. The heart was knowing that image before the brain, and the heart responded to that image, and the brain responded to the image a nanosecond before the computer randomly selected the image and displayed it on the screen. In other words, people knew before the computer had fired and made that random decision. Both the heart and the brain knew. So our brains are much more like receivers of information from this universal energy field. They're not producing consciousness. They are immersed in consciousness. They're translating consciousness into the consciousness around us. One example I give from the pandemic now is that in February, when all the stores were closed here in California, I walked down one of my favorite streets in town, and one pub I used to love to go to had a big sign outside the front door: "We closed for good. 31 years, we made it through all these bad times. Thank you for your patronage, but we're throwing in the towel." And so they just shut down their whole operation. Then I went to another restaurant, and I ordered by phone, and they had a setup where you could go to the outside of the restaurant, pick up your order on a table outside. I talked to the owner who was standing behind the table. I said, "Well, how's your business doing?" She said, "Oh, well, our dining rooms have been shut down, but I've always wanted to start a takeout business, and we're thriving. We're doing great. In fact, I've had to rehire all of my waiters from the dining room, which is closed, as sous chefs to work in the kitchen because we're so busy." So, same event that all the dining rooms are closed, one person turns it into an opportunity for a new business, the other throws in the towel. It's purely consciousness. We think it's the pandemic. We think it's the economy. It's not. It's what's going on here that is actually creating what happens out there.
You mentioned earlier in the podcast that you were a skeptic before. What is your background? So did you have an enlightening experience, or you just, how skeptical were you before?
Well, I thought this whole saying that we create our reality. The Buddha said, "With our minds we create the world." He said that more than 2,000 years ago. Henry Thoreau, William James, in the Psalms it says of the Bible, written probably 3,000, 4,000 years ago, says, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." And so there's always Abraham Hicks, the teachings of Abraham, where your thoughts create your reality. And I thought that I didn't believe that.
Was that the law of attraction?
Yeah, law of attraction. Yeah, and I thought that was just really far out there. So I began to read the science.
And what were you at the time? You were a doctor, or what were you?
No, I'm a researcher, and
Okay.
for the last 20 years I've been doing research, especially to do with PTSD. So I'm knee deep in research and with people, with veterans, and with stressed populations, and looking at their traumatic stress. And so I was doing research, and I thought, well, let's.
So it's your job to be skeptical.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And I've heard people make claims about, "Oh, my therapy is great," and I test the therapy, and the therapy isn't. So science is just gives you the facts. You can believe some stuff about global warming or climate change, or about EFT, or about tapping or acupuncture. Like, you go on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia is controlled by a group of hostile professional skeptics who have locked down that entry for the last 15 years and call it pseudoscience, and they ignore over 1,000 acupuncture studies. Their minds are totally made up. So there are those people who just their minds are so shut to science, the science deniers, and the people who deny evolution, people who deny climate change, people who deny acupuncture and energy fields. And so they're all these science deniers. And so A skeptic is someone who has an open mind and wants to know what science really says and will act on science. And so that's what I am. Show me the science. And like with meditation, I heard all these claims about meditation methods. And my meditation method it produces enlightenment. Well, what is enlightenment, and what are you producing, and how are you doing that, and what data do you have? So I just go for the hard data, and that's what's really turned me into a believer. I mean, one small example, Jack. I was raised. My father was an Anglican priest, but my uncle was an Anglican priest. We had a lot of clergy, deacons, and people in my family. But I grew up saying grace. My family would put their hands together and say grace. But it was a sham. It was just, it didn't mean anything. There was no real emotion to it. But now I've read the studies of the effect of holding your hands intentionally around food or around water or around a plant. In one study of healers holding their hands around plants, the plants that were held grew bigger and faster. And in one of the studies in Bliss Brain, it shows that the molecular bonding angle of water literally changes. The angle of the bond between the oxygen atom and the two hydrogen atoms literally changes when you hold that intentionally. So now I take my water and I bless my water. I pray over my food, and now I'm doing it. The religious people couldn't convince me, but I read the studies. I mean, these are hard studies done in a spectrometer, measuring that bonding angle, and they are unequivocal. That bonding angle changes when you pray or have intention over water, over food. So yeah, science.
Gosh, wow, it's fascinating. Because I mentioned I was I'm in the Aetherius Society, and we do send out energy. Because when you pray with your hands closed, it's not really logical, because you want to send that energy to the world. You have to use the hands out, so you project out, and because there are chakras in the palms and through the heart, so you send it into this to world healing or to somebody, or we send it into these batteries. These batteries are designed with crystals inside that store the energy, and then a radiator releases them whenever there's a crisis. And if there's a big problem, you can't get hundreds of people to pray together at one time, but you can turn on this battery and send it to wherever it has to go. So because it could be something to test in the future.
It could be, and there aren't enough studies of that kind of healing. So I list the ones that I could find in the book. Mm-hmm. And some things are really well known, well understood, like the way stress and negative thinking affects the body. There's a lot of research on that. Some of these things like there's no research per se on how thoughts change gravity. That's a really hard thing to study. I have a friend who is doing studies like this. He's looking at the speed of molecular transmission, how fast photons travel through, are conducted through a fiber optic cable. I mean, these are really difficult, expensive experiments. They're not experiments like having people sit in a room for an hour and then measuring their mood before and after with a questionnaire. So those kinds of experiments, there's no money for them. Like I have to go raise money from funders to try and do some of this research. If I had unlimited funds and time, I would really like to start studying water more, because in some of the images in Mind to Matter, they show, for example, that in one study done at the University of Stuttgart in Germany, researchers had students hold a medicine dropper of water, and then they would make 20 droplets on a microscope slide, which would then get dried and then examined under the slide. And the water from a student crystallizes in a certain really clear pattern. So every one of those 20 drops of water crystallizes in exactly the same pattern. But then the second student, taking the same distilled water as the first student and putting it through using the medicine dropper, putting it on a microscope slide, student number 2, his 20 drops also look identical to every other drop and also look completely different from those drops of student number 1. So each of us, as the water passes through our unique field, we're literally changing that water, and it shows up in these experiments. So I'd love to do more of those, and I don't know if I ever will, but That's what I'd love to see more of, is more hard science, especially about gravity. How do we change gravity? We know lots of stories of people who change gravity. Saint Teresa of Avila was observed floating above the floor sometimes. The biggest anti-gravity guy was a Italian monk called Saint John of Cupertino, and he was observed to levitate, like for hours sometimes at heights of like 20 feet. He'd start saying the Mass, he'd go into this blissful state, and he'd just float off the floor. So in 1300, this was not a really good idea, because there was something called the Inquisition. So they hauled him off to Rome for the Inquisition, and all these inquisitors were sitting there like, we're gonna nail this guy. So they said, okay, now just these hostile cardinals in the Inquisition saying, okay, Friar Joseph, say the Mass. And he began saying the Mass, and before the Pope, before kings, before ambassadors. His exploits, when he was canonized, his exploits fill, I think, 30 volumes of eyewitness testimony in the Vatican archives. These people saw him, including the Inquisition, just saw him float above the altar for a long time while he said Mass. He'd go into ecstasy, he defied gravity. So they're modern stories too. Go on YouTube, just type in levitating monks, and you'll see numerous visitors to Tibet who photograph people with their handheld iPhones, and these monks levitate. So how on earth do people do that? I have no idea, and I'd love to find out.
my teacher told me. I'm studying with this guy Nehemiah Davis, who's a yogi, he's a metaphysician, and he says it's when you raise Kundalini up through Sushumna, it activates when you reach the heart chakra. You lose the gravity. Dr. King, who founded the Aetherius Society, had his landlady had to clean the ceiling because it was covered with his Brill cream from his head.
Oh wow! What a great story.
Yeah, and we got the Dawson laugh there, which is great. I saw that on your website. So yeah. But yeah, I mean, of all the things you've heard, I mean, you must have a research list that's very, very long. I mean,
well, what challenges me nowadays too is that I love meditation. I love leisure time. I love swimming. I love kayaking. I love rollerblading. I love bicycling. I just love being alive. And I live in California. Spend usually the winters in Hawaii. So I just have a really blessed life. And so I enjoy doing things that influence people to meditate, because I know that if they meditate, if they tap, their lives will change. I mean, my life changed radically within a year of learning those techniques. And so I like doing that. And yet I'm always torn between doing more stuff and just loving life, going with my wife and my kids and my grandkids and doing fun things. So we need to have both things going on in our lives. We need to have some form of self-nurturing and self-care. But the beauty of it is that when you learn these techniques, you then bring that self-care into your workday. So I look at my to-do list, and it's long, or there's an annoying thing that's happening I have to deal with at work, whatever it might be. But I'm coming there from Bliss Brain. I start with Bliss Brain. I'm starting with my hands open, blessing my computer screen. I'm in a wonderful frame of mind. And when you're that way, you're resilient. Like in the first chapter of Bliss Brain, the publisher said, tell the story of what happened to you and what happened to the resilience. And I do. In the first chapter of the book, I tell about being woken up in the middle of the night at 12:45 a.m. when my wife shook me awake and said something's wrong. I looked out of the window of our bedroom, and I just looked lost out of the window, and there was this orange glow on the horizon. I jumped out of bed, ran outside, and there was this wildfire sweeping down the canyon toward our house. We literally grabbed our car keys and sprinted for the car and drove out through the flames. And I tell the story of that night in the first chapter of Bliss Brain, and it was a horrible night. I mean, 5,400 homes burned down in that wildfire in one night, leaving over 5,000 families homeless, including my wife and I. And was it all easy and sweet and effortless? No. When we were traumatized like everyone else, we began having flashbacks and nightmares like the people I write about and study. And we had a whole year of, I had a serious health problem as a result of the fire, and all kinds of, we had a financial wipeout in our business as a result. And during all that time, I wrote a book called Bliss Brain because I was meditating and I was just recovering. I was feeling just one with the universe. I'd sit there while, I mean, it was such a financial disaster for us that I literally had to drain my retirement accounts. And at one point, we had drained all of our available funds, and we were $300,000 in debt. I'd sit there in Bliss Brain in the morning, and I'd write in my journal, I'm a prosperous person. I write that as my reality. And you know, resilience isn't just a theory. Resilience is a neurological fact. You've just built so much neurological material around those circuits after a while that your house burns down, you have a financial crash, you have a medical problem and have to have surgery, and you're just basically in bliss brain all the time. It's crazy. I mean, I wanted to share this with the world because for me, having had that trial by fire, literally, and then having come out the other side, that's why the publisher said, you have to write this book and make it personal as well as professional. So I give all the neuroscience in the book, and like in 2 chapters, I do tell our story as well.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I really want to help you share your story. I want to serve you the way you're serving all these veterans and all these people who've suffered. And so I'll write a song for you to help you publicize Bliss Brain.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Is there, I haven't read the book yet, so I have to, just have to make the cover jacket rhyme. But is there anything?
I'm not sure what rhymes with Bliss Brain. I just got a copy from the publisher this week, so it'll be shipping in September. But what rhymes? Well, the subtitle is The Neuroscience of Remodeling Your Brain for Resilience, Creativity, and Joy. So you have 3 great words to rhyme there: resilience, creativity, and joy.
Okay, all right. And so, yeah, that's the message then. Brilliant. No, that's, I need to, because you, especially, you know, someone like yourself who's had so much, who's done so much, you know, it's hard to narrow it down, isn't it? You have to. So I'll definitely focus on. And who wouldn't want a bliss brain? I mean, you're better. You make a better life for your family. You're in a better position to serve others. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to leave people with that message, Jack, that you can't imagine how much happier you can get when you're in that state of limitation and limited thinking that most people live their lives in. When your prefrontal cortex, your mid-prefrontal cortex is all active, you're full of self-absorption, you have no idea of how much your life can change. But that study showing that those monks had 25 times the gamma, that's serious science. And imagine your life 25 times as happy as you are. Many people who've broken through and lived bliss brain look back on their old life and they can't even imagine how they used to be that way. They can't imagine they used to have those problems and suffer so much. And you liberate yourself from suffering, and then you do it every day. And even when you have a financial crash, you're still happy. Your house burns down, and you know, I wrote in Bliss Brain, I have one image in chapter 1, because when our we were staying for a while, a few days at a place about 30 miles away, but one of our friends got into the area and took a photograph, 2 photographs actually, of the house. And where the house had been, there was just a concrete slab, chimney sticking up, and our office was on the same property, and the office is just a concrete slab and just ash, gray ash. That's all it was. I mean, the filing cabinets melted, the water cooler melted, the desks melted, the computers melted, just gray ash. And the only thing that didn't melt in the office is we had this ceramic statue of a Buddha. Maybe 10 years earlier, somebody for storage had stuck the Buddha in the back of a closet. And so someone else had then put a bunch of files in front of the Buddha. And so for 10 years, we forgot the Buddha was there until everything burned down. So this photograph was absolutely amazing. And it showed this concrete slab totally covered by ash. In the middle sits this completely intact Buddha. And it gives me chills right now, because what I wrote about in that blog post was, it said that photograph showed me that compassion can't be burned, love can't be burned, kindness can't be burned, optimism can't be burned, joy can't be burned. Everything in your life can burn down, And if you've got this kind of bliss brain, if you're anchored in non-local reality, you know that this is just local stuff. It's just possessions. That what really counts is what is in the heart, what is in the universe, and that can never be destroyed. And that was the message to me of the saint in the ashes. So things can get really good for you, much better than you can imagine. It can happen really quickly. It's a formula. It's a brainwave formula. We reverse engineered it. We can train you how to do this really quickly. I write books about it. And then once you do that, you are resilient and able to handle whatever life throws at you.
Sold. Fantastic. Well, I'll get my advanced copy order in. Wonderful. Well, this has been so inspiring chatting to you, Dawson. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it's going to be an amazing song with an amazing subject as this. So if it's not, it's my fault if I don't translate it. So because thank you very much.
Thank you in advance. I look forward to hearing it.
Thank you very much, Dawson. Well, have a wonderful day.
You too. Every blessing. Thank you.
Start with your tongue loose inside your mouth. This will relax your vagus nerve. Take the parasympathetic lane to Bliss Brain. Now imagine a void behind your eyes. Turn off your frontal lobe. Everything's changed. Bliss Brain. Regulate your breathing now. 6 seconds in, 6 out. Start a heart coherence chain to Bliss Brain. Visualize breath through the heart, a sphere of energy. Start to take aim at Bliss Brain. Next send a beam of energy to a place that feels wonderful. Thank God you're going again to Bliss Brain. Gradually expand this beam out for universal compassion. So simple to attain Bliss Brain. Brain with the software of mind. Flourish in compassion, become truly kind. In complete coherence, an alpha state. Every day more, the more you meditate. Remember, tongue loose inside the mouth. A void behind your eyes. Breathe your way to Bliss Brain. Thanks, Dawson, for the inspiration. Let's all go and meditate. Before we do, if we could just click like, share, write a review on your app where you're listening to it now, that would really help because we're still on the launch pad with Podsongs. I think I can count the number of listeners on a very small, deformed hand. I'm doing everything I can with writing these songs and interviewing the people. So if you could join in by sharing the word, I would really, really appreciate it. I want to say thank you to the musicians, Maurizio Sarnicola, Massimino Vozza, my researcher, Dori Verbo, and you, the listener. Thank you.